Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever it is that you are. Welcome to yet another live stream of consciousness. It's been a while since I've done one of these kind of freewheeling variety of topics that I've accumulated sort of conversations. And I have a lot that I'm prepared to talk about today. I have things, thoughts, dump, ideas to talk about, cool things I've seen. But first and foremost, how's everyone doing? I'm here currently set up. I have some prunes next to me. I have some protein shake. Shake that up. And that is my fuel for this live stream. It's been a long day. I've been doing a lot of preparation, a lot of other work, but I am so ready to get into all this. I've been excited about it for a while. I hope my audio and everything is good. Yeah, just making sure. And I think first and foremost, did everybody see like the most recent video? If not, it's cool, but I just had an idea of doing like a postscript for the videos that I do going forward. Just kind of talking about some of this stuff that I don't really get to talk about in the videos themselves, answering questions, um, taking in some feedback and that kind of thing. So while that's being talked about or considered, while you're mulling over that, if you had any questions or whatever, I think one of the main things that I wanted to get at with this video, and let me pull it up so y'all could see. Yeah, so I think one of the main things that I was trying to get at with this video, with Nobody Wants to Be Working Class, is really just the importance of not limiting our imaginations. I mean, that's kind of a through line through a lot of my videos, talking about the problems with the system, but going beyond just talking about the problems and analyzing the problems, diagnosing the problems, and really addressing solutions, what we can do meaningfully to make a difference, to create change. And so unions have long been seen and usually celebrated as one of the main ways to get into radical politics, to foment social change, and for good reason. Because unions really do have a lot of power. They wield the labor of the working class, of the organized working class, and that labor is responsible for a large portion of why it is that this system is able to persist. It's one of the main reasons, one of the main ways the system persists. And so by wielding that labor, we can, force changes, we can force concessions, and that kind of thing. But I always like to try and go deeper than that, simple, straightforward subject. And so the main thing for me with unions is just what I've observed about them, about how they actually are in practice. And as I said at the beginning of the video, I think my frustration has been that there was this time, when they were really champions of the masses liberators to be, and they've kind of fallen from grace. And not to say there aren't still radical unions, but in many parts of the world, in my parts of the world, in Trinidad and Tobago, and noticeably in the US, these unions are very much integrated into the system, very much class collaborationist, more so than actually antagonistic toward the system and, engaged in meaningful class conflict. And so what I really want to, I guess, weigh and consider is what, if any, role can unions play going forward? Because there is that method of, social insertions, the strat that, the specifists tend to talk about. And, that's a useful strat, that's a valuable strat, I think, which is basically entering into existing organizations and movements and pushing them in an anarchist direction. That's well and good. I think, however, that without like a significant push from a a large enough amount of people that entering these kinds of organizations and entering these kinds of movements could also have the opposite effect of, I suppose, like reversing radicals inertia. You know what I mean? Like they're going in one particular direction and then they get caught up in this kind of bureaucratic trap for which there's no escape. And I mean, there's a similar thing happening with people who end up getting into party politics. They have these ideas, they want to create a change, but the way a lot of these systems function is, you being a small part of the whole tends to affect you more than you affect the whole. Not to say that individuals can't create change, but there's a significant, you know, impetus or push by the system to move people, a current, an inertia, a trajectory that the system pushes people into. And so I don't really have like an easy, simple, straightforward answer in terms of whether you go into unions and try to change it from within, whether you start your own unions and try that route, whether you try and create the big tent union of all the industries, as some people have tried to and are still trying to historically. But I think that there needs to be a reckoning with that question and with what that kind of transformation, the kind of transformation that we want requires. And I think that starts, of course, with knowing what exactly it is you're going for, which is the project of this channel. I mean, the main project of the channel is learning and exploring as much as possible, but you know, part of that is learning and exploring a potential future or potential futures. So I hope that people enjoyed that particular video. And let me just check and see if anybody's asking any questions. Because I am locked in to my app session right now. You like how bouncy faces during lives? Nice. Yeah, love the video on unions. Blue Collar Empire is a great book on the horrors the AFL-CIO partakes in to this day, like regime changes in Latin America. Yeah, that was, I think, a really frustrating part of it for me. Is just seeing the ways that unions, which are supposed to be, working class organizations, it really goes to show, I think, that the working class is not this like neat and simple designation that determines the politics of its members. That there are divisions within the working class that are also worthy of analysis and also stand in the way of that kind of class solidarity that we're expected to have to create that social change. Because the workers in countries in the global north, while they are still workers at the end of the day, and they do feel the strain and the suffering of exploitation, there are also, unfortunately, beneficiaries of the exploitation of other workers who are much worse off, and unfortunately, a lot of people's approach to, I guess, liberation or political change is more so, let me just get a piece of the pie, let me get a seat at the table, rather than questioning the setup of the pie or questioning the existence of the table, you know? Let me see what people are saying. Yeah, you could feel free to ask questions. What would daily life be in your version of an anarchist society? That's a really big question, though. I honestly don't have a singular ideal version of an anarchist society to even describe for you, particularly off the top of my head. I am interested in creative writing. I do want to explore that direction in the future, but I think my focus is really on how I can create anarchist momentum in the here and now, more so than what daily life might look like. As useful as that kind of world building approach might be, and that's my I guess take on daily life. What are your stance on trans and queer rights and how? I don't know how my stance is. I know what my stance is, which is that they're people and they deserve to be free to make their decisions and live their lives without having to face the impositions of prejudice and status oppression and religious oppression. how would anarchism work on an international scale? It's another big picture question that is more in the realm of world building and heavy theory, which is, valid question, but it's not so much what I tend to try to get into on the live streams of consciousness. That's the kind of question that I like to sit with, write about. And it's a question that I'm, through the course of my channel, through all these videos I'm doing, putting the pieces together to create that answer. Do I have a reading list for an ignorant beginner? Yes, I do. You can check my website. That's andrewsage.org. And yeah, there's a reading list on there. Have I got into Afro-pessimism? No, I've always just kind of skirted the periphery of it. So I don't want to, and the vibe I got from it was pessimistic. I didn't really get a nice vibe from it, so I didn't look into it. I mean, there's so many different things that I have to look into and think about and explore, and so I do have to prioritize. So, for example, right now I'm like really into African History Extra on Substack. That's like let me pull that up real quick. Yeah, these articles are fantastic. Every morning I'm like reading one of them with my breakfast. I've had a really good time and really expanded my knowledge of African history. And so yeah, but in doing this and looking into this and reading about this, I have to deprioritize other subjects. So I'm reading about this, but that means that I can't necessarily read about, I don't know, nuclear energy or Afro-pessimism. Not to say I'm not interested in eventually looking into Afro-pessimism, but I don't have that on my priorities right now, so I don't have much to say about it. Artificial right, system, new villages, new communities, real. Question part two, do you believe in dialectical materialism? Do I believe in dialectical materialism? I think dialectical materialism is a tool, and like any tool, it has its place. But like any tool, I think it can also be misused or misunderstood in ways that are damaging, harmful. It's like treating every problem as though it were a nail and you had a hammer, or however that saying goes. What I think about Dances with Wolves, I haven't seen Dances with Wolves. And I'm not surprised that you asked that question because I do have, James Cameron's Avatar on the thumbnail. So it is something that I plan on talking about a little later on the stream. I plan on talking about the geopolitical situation and stuff. I'm kind of saving the heavy stuff for the end because, it would feel like a whiplash for me to be talking about a bunch of light topics or fairy topics and then get into Venezuela and Iran and Rojava and stuff and then have to jump right back into light stuff. So I'm kind of leaving the heavy stuff for last. I hope you understand. Let's see here. So I guess I could get into what it is that I want to talk about first, because I did prepare some notes. And that is, first and foremost, the channel review, which is something I wanted to do for a while now. But, this is the first year where I feel like I'm in a place where I could do it comfortably. And so I just kind of wanted to look at the topics that I spoke about in past videos from 2025 and really rank them in terms of how well I believe I covered the topics, whether there's anything I would change or do differently, any feedback or thoughts I have on it, that kind of thing. Why is that car backfiring? I don't know if you're hearing that. There's a car outside like backfiring repeatedly. Anyway, so it's like a typical, tier list scale, the S being, let me pull that up for y'all to see first. I have like one screen, so I'm like constantly having to jump between windows. Right. So the S would be like videos that I think are underrated. The A would be stuff that I wouldn't necessarily change much about. I think are pretty good and stand well on their own. B is stuff I would say is pretty solid or could do more with. C would be, it's alright. And D would be, I think, a video that I would consider undercooked or that I would probably restructure or do entirely differently. So, and forgive me, I'm going to be burping a lot because I had like some kind of zinc vitamin thing. And I ate it. I ate something and then I drank it, but I don't think I ate enough. So it's like kind of bubbling up in my stomach right now. So I'll have to kind of take random sentence breaks and stuff. Okay, so I guess we could start with the first video, which was what if we ran the economy? And that video, I think, was pretty well done. It's kind of a remake, a redux of a previous video that I had done on the economy and library economy and commons and kind of fusing those topics and also building on top of it based on some of the feedback that I got. That video popped off, it received a really, really strong and great response. And I think that because I had covered the topic previously, I spoke about pretty much everything I want to talk about as it related to library economies in that video. Not to say that I won't maybe have more to talk about regarding it in the future, but I think I said my piece with that one, and there isn't much I would do differently. I wouldn't change much. The next video though is the real cost of fashion, and I had fun researching it, writing it, putting together the visuals, and to be honest, the visuals element of making the videos is always a love-hate relationship for me. On the one hand, I really do enjoy, actually when the visuals are complete and it's a one cohesive piece. But the process of finding the visuals and putting it together, and that takes days. And it's pretty exhausting sometimes. But I still really liked kind of venturing into that topic. Even though I feel like it didn't, get as much reception as what I wanted it to. I would say it was pretty solid. And I'm trying to think if there's anything I would do more or do differently for that video. Probably not. Probably not. Let's see what. Let's see. Let me see. Let me see. Let me see. I'm just taking a break to look at the chat. Regarding my opinion on land back, I mean, I made a video on land back many years ago. I'd have to look at that video and see if my perspective has updated since then. So you could look at it and see what you think of it. Uh, on a basic level, though, land back as an aspect of decolonization, yeah, I'm 100% for it. Opinion on platformism, not really a fan. Violent crime, how should be addressed about prisons and police. I have a video about it, which I actually did. um, I did a video on that like a couple months ago, so you can just check the channel. I mean, a lot of things people ask about, more than likely, I have like 80 something videos, I think. At this point, I've probably touched on it briefly. Anyway, back to the ranking. So yeah, the cost fashion, I'll probably put it as a B. I know there's more that I could have done with it, but I'm pretty happy with where it is as well. But I don't think it's as, up echelon as this library economy video. I think that library economy video is like one of what I would consider the essentials of the channel. Like if you did not have the time, as nobody has the time to watch all the videos that I've ever made. I wouldn't watch all the videos I've ever made. I've only watched them because I made them. right? Um, but if you had to watch a few, like the library economy video is one of the few that I would say that you should go ahead and watch. And the only reason I don't put it in the S tier is actually I will put it in the S tier because I still consider it underrated. It was one of the better performing videos of last year, but it's still underrated because we need to see more library economies, right? The myths of the system video, ranking the myths of the system video. This one was really I had difficulty with I think how I was doing the ranking, and I don't think I settled on a ranking system that made much sense in retrospect. I mean, before I even like released the video, there were people who had a kind of a strong reaction to the idea that I would make a tier list video of any kind. And I wanted to do a tier list video because I just wanted to shake up the format of the videos a bit. I don't want things to get so monotonous and boring, And there was another experiment like that, a couple other experiments like that later in the year as well, because I think 2025 was the year that I was trying to do more creatively with the videos and not just settle into a slump. And I'm still working on mixing things up and changing things up as I go along. But this was one of the first attempts at doing so. I think it went okay for a first attempt. And I think that even though the ranking itself was kind of convoluted, the idea of having these kind of shorter, like rapid fire, you know, describe a myth and then address it, like I found that was a fun and, useful way of delivering a lot of information, a lot of radical positions all at once. And so for that, I would still put it in the A tier. Wouldn't change much. Now, the What's Doing the System Fails Us, that was just, I'd read the book, The Serviceberry by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and I really liked it. And I just wanted to, share my thoughts on it, share what I got from the video. And it being such a short video, I'm thinking I probably could have made it like a second channel thing. So that's something I probably would have done differently rather than have it on the main channel because I've realized YouTube doesn't really like when you vary the lengths of your video that much. So having like a bunch of short videos and a bunch of long videos and a bunch of medium videos is not the best route, I realize. And so I try to stick within my like 15 to 30 minute range. Although to be honest, I don't really think about video length when I start making a video. I just start making it and I do my research and I outline the script and I, flesh out what it is that I want to say. And if the script comes up to a certain length, it comes up to that length. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It's not like I'm trying to pad the runtime or trying to cut myself off from saying more. I mean, I do limit some digressions. I put some things in footnotes, which I'm not sure too many people see because I don't know what percentage of the audience watches the video versus listens to it. But I do have the occasional footnote in the video itself, like in the visuals. And yeah, I try to approach it like an essay and I want to make sure that the arguments flow well, the information flows well. And so even if a digression has like interesting information, I wouldn't want to throw off the whole, flow of it. But speaking of digressions, let me just give this a ranking. I would say it's all right. It's all right. I mean, it's not, jaw dropping, like mind blowing or anything, but I think it did what it had to do. Now this next one, oh, God. Before I get to that one, let me see what the chat's saying. Because again, trying to multitask here. Yeah, thoughts on solar punk storytelling to encourage optimistic visualization. I did a live stream with ALXD on this topic of solar punk storytelling, particularly how we do so through visuals. And that was kind of like a workshop of sorts, an ad hoc workshop of sorts that I still have. It's a VOD. I think I have it public. It might be unlisted. If it's unlisted, you could just check the live streams playlist, and it should be there. It would have been a conversation we had maybe in April or sometime earlier last year when we were talking about the upcoming solar punk art collaboration. So he would have presented some interesting stuff on that. So you could go and check that out. I might make a clip of it and put it on the second channel, to be honest, because that is useful information, and I wouldn't want it to be buried in just a live stream. Will I make any videos on Spanish anarchists? Yeah, I mean, I did a series on Latin American anarchisms over the course of a couple months on the podcast It Could Happen Here. And I have been thinking about repurposing all those scripts and making like a mega video about that history and my thoughts on the directions that Latin American anarchism went in. But I mean, for now, that's like really far down the road. For me, I have a lot of things that I kind of prioritizing. And also, I think venturing into history, like a really explicitly historically focused turn, kind of is different from what I would normally talk about. I tend to prefer thinking about and presenting about what people can do tangibly, or thinking about talking about ideas. I think with history, you have to be particularly rigorous, more so than I think I'm always capable of being. And because I really hold history to a high standard, or I try to, if I were to do a history focused video, I want to give it a lot of special attention. I want to do further research even that I did for the live stream. Not the live stream, sorry. Even more research than I did for the podcast. So, kind of saving it for that. Yeah, speaking of historical topics, someone asked about the Haitian Revolution and doing a video on that. I was actually supposed to do a live stream interview about the Haitian Revolution, about the Black Jacobins, many years ago, but it didn't end up panning out. But I could probably circle back and see if they're still willing to do that video, because it is a topic worth addressing and worth having a conversation about. I just don't think that those kind of historical conversations are necessarily my forte. Historical essays, that kind of stuff is something I like to learn about and read about and share bits and pieces of, but not necessarily something I would make whole videos about unless I was particularly compelled to do so. The second channel, by the way, it's just called Extra Androism. I'm gonna make a let me put that in the links actually one time. Let me just make that quick edit to the description of the video. I should probably add a website as well. andrewsage.org and youtube.com/extra androism. I don't know if those links will work. Let me just check and make sure. Okay, let's try that now. Okay, boom. So there isn't the extra androism link did not work. Let me fix that. Hello to France from France. Well, not from France, from Trinidad. I don't think you would ever get a video from me on my thoughts and the lessons of the Chinese Cultural Revolution for a couple of different reasons. One, it's Chinese history. I've heard is really cool, but it's not a passion of mine or a focus of mine. Two, yeah, I mean one suffices. It's not really something I'm that interested in or keen on. Um, but I'm sure you could find a variety of perspectives on that all over the place, for better and for worse. And yeah, I'm gonna start using the second channel more once I have the things to put on it, which this live stream will probably be cut up into clips and uploaded onto the second channel. Also, that link should be working now. Yeah. I don't do these streams too often. I want to start doing them more because I realize there are a lot of things that I would like to talk about that I don't get to. Yeah, I mean, I fixed the 404, I think. The link should be working now. But I want to do these live streams more because there's a lot of stuff I want to get to that I don't typically get to on the regular videos. Current events. I don't talk about current events, normally. And, pop culture. I'm not a pop culture, like, video essayist. Commentary. I don't, honestly, I like to be off the internet. And so all these different things that are worth some amount of attention if, they pique my interest, but are not necessarily worth enough attention to make a whole video about, or not necessarily something that I feel like fits my channel and my purpose for the channel, but I still want to talk about it. So that's what these streams will be for. I'm not much of a off the cuff kind of guy. I prefer to write, but I do want to practice speaking, and I still have, things I want to say. So I have prepared notes a lot of times for these streams, but then I also end up going off the cuff, answering questions, talking about stuff. When I ever do a video on the Black Power movement in Trinidad, um, I mean, I might, I might, if I were to do, thing is, if I were to do those kind of big historical videos, the amount of, I'll put it this way. Okay, for one, I would prefer, if I were to do those kind of videos, I would want somebody to do the actual visuals for me because God, visuals are hell for me. And so having to do all that research and writing and then have to find visuals for them as well, it's not really my preference, at least not for those particular topics. With ideas, I think it's a bit easier, but not for those kind of topics. So if I were to do these kind of videos, it would have to be that I have like enough to like I have the means, the wherewithal to hire people, to probably hire like a research assistant or to like hire an editor, commission an editor or whatever. Because I don't, I'm already split like a bunch of different ways as it is. And I feel like this pressure all the time to like keep up with making, you know, a video a month at least, and that's mostly a self-inflicted pressure, but I want to maintain that pace, and I'm trying to maintain that pace while also doing stuff for the podcast. It could happen here, while also writing the book, while also getting exercise, living my life outside of the four walls of the internet. Yeah, her. I think okay. So the person asked like, if I y'all into production with me. I I don't want people to see how the sausage gets made though. Like the internet kind of compels this sort of constant show me, how this gets made. Show me this constant stream of exposure to the process, and I think artists, writers, people of that ilk, while showing the process, showing the pencil shavings or whatever, it's good for some. I feel that I prefer the magic of not knowing how certain things are made, how certain things are produced. So for me, I would prefer. My process is also really scattered. Like I'd write a little bit and then go down a rabbit hole and then read this and read that. And then having to like engage with chat while doing that is just, to me, it's like a nightmare. I wouldn't be able to keep up with something like that. Anyway, let me get back into the ranking. Yeah, I didn't mean that. I meant you speak of inspiring change. Allow us to help use your platform to reach people and inspire change through plans, through business and physical communities. See, I don't think that is. I get that suggestion fairly often, and I don't think it's. How do I put this? The platform that I have here, this channel, it reaches. Like, yes, I know it says 234,000 subscribers. Of those 234,000 subscribers, I get like a fraction of those, or a rotating fraction of those in views on each and any particular video. And then you'll see on streams I get like maybe a couple hundred, maybe 100 people, not even a couple hundred, 100 people or so watching the stream, right? And then you think about where those people are coming from. You're talking about, at least for my analytics, I have like 40 something percent Americans, and then the rest of the percentage is like scattered across the entire world. And while I think the impetus behind the suggestion is in the right place, I don't think that the digital realm of community building is something that I consider particularly valuable or useful. I don't even really consider internet communities to be communities in the same sense that the term should be used. And while I think that my role as someone who can deliver information and share what I'm learning and stuff is useful, I don't want to create like a space around myself. I think the work that I'm doing is already enough to inspire people to come up with their own plans to, you know, get involved in the physical communities. And off of the internet, I am also doing stuff on my own locally, right? I just don't think that I can build something like that. I don't think the platform works in that way. I don't think it's useful to that end. I think it's useful up to a point of, sharing information, inspiring ideas. And I think beyond that, people need to pick up those ideas and come off of the internet and look at what they can do immediately around them. You know, not to yuck the yum, if that's something that other people or channels or whatever want to pursue, or more power to them. It's just not something that I see myself doing. I have the information I'm sharing, and then I have the work that I'm doing offline. Is it difficult to stay off the internet, especially as someone who runs a YouTube channel? Yes and no. I mean, I'm not really. I like to be a ghost, I guess, on the internet. So I might lurk from time to time, but I don't really engage. And then also because of the amount of work that the writing requires, the research, the editing, all of that, the videos require, I tend to decompress when I don't have to do that. And part of that decompression does take place online. I would keep up with the channels that I like to watch, or I would play games, or I would, go to gym, or I would read a book, all these different things, right? And that's all well and good. And I don't really find myself spending that much time engaging in political spaces online. I had a phase where I was really into that, like 2019, 2020, 2021 and stuff. And then it just kind of came off. Like I got sick of it. I got tired of the, you know, repeated conversations, the circular arguments, the poor argumentation, the amount of fallacies and just talking past people and the posturing. Like, all of that. I don't think it helps. It would help my channel to engage in that. I mean, it probably would in the sense of people like blood sports. They like that kind of drama politics, but it wouldn't help the channel in the way that I want the channel to be helped, which is, cultivating people, an audience of people who are interested in, critical thought and reflection and thinking about these ideas and finding solutions in taking the unanswered or open questions of my videos and applying it to their own situation and applying their own lens and going forward that the kind of back and forth rara that I see on the politics internet is not something that I think would help my channel. It's something that is like good for me, like my mental health. And so yeah, it's as weird as it is, I tend to avoid it and it works for me. Yeah, the second channel, the link is in the description for that. How do you square that with how easily the right organizes via digital spaces? Well, the right has physical infrastructure, political support, and their ideology is the status quo. In terms of the ability to reach people and the aims of that outreach, it works for them, but at least for what I'm trying to do, the challenge is, getting people to question some of their deepest underlying assumptions, their most treasured beliefs about the world and how it works and all these different things. And beyond that, it's just not just a matter of creating like this rabid uh base of grippers or whatever. It would be a matter of getting those people offline because these are platforms that are owned and run by billionaires to their ends, which is often division and conflict and yeah, strife. And so I wouldn't equate the I wouldn't say that the right methods of doing things can just be replicated because they're tapping into perhaps base instincts or lower level emotions that we are trying to challenge and subvert. We aren't offering simple solutions and quick answers and easy scapegoats. So oh, my audio is low. Let me try and speak a little closer to the mic. Yeah, we're not looking for those kind of scapegoats and the kind of simplified narratives that the right professors. And so obviously the simpler narrative is going to pick up more. Our job is to challenge that and also build the physical infrastructure of the alternative that will compel people without you even necessarily having to argue much with them. Because once they see the right solutions are not solutions at all, I think having an alternative that they can observe, that they can see in practice, is far more valuable than trying to build up our online space. And yeah, like someone said, like Megatherium said, the right does have a large physical base. The intent is to organize already existing communities. Yeah. Let me take a little break. I'm gonna just take a little sip of my protein shake. Shake it up. Mm-mm-mm. Chunks of protein. Nice. Also, let me turn on the lights. I just realized I didn't put the lights on. In the dark here. Right. Let me continue. What has been your reaction in your country hosting US forces while Trump's doing regime change? I did a live stream about that like 2 months ago. So you can go and check that out if you are interested. And I do intend to speak a bit more about the geopolitics situation later in the stream. Right, so let me just continue with the ranking real quick. So this next video, I think is I had the idea for this video, which is what if we ran a revolution like a business? I had the idea for this concept, the structure, these are the delivery mechanism for years, and I only executed it last year, right? The idea was, let me take some of these simple concepts that I talked about in like business workshops, entrepreneurship courses, business school, that kind of thing. Things like SWOT analysis, um, and pestle analysis, and talking about marketing and all these different things, and kind of shove it into a revolutionary framework and see how it fits, whether there's anything useful we can get out of the idea. And so there was an intentional tongue-in-cheekness to it that I think wasn't. I think it didn't. It was understood by some, but I also noticed a reaction. They just kind of took the video on a very surface level. But at this point, I kind of expect that from the internet. I expect that sort of quick, easy, simple reaction to things. Unfortunately, media literacy is getting worse, and it's much easier to just, screenshot and react to something rather than engage with it and see what value you could take away from it. And so I would say that this video was underrated. I thought it was really fun to make. I got to commission a piece of art talking about to depict the actual end goal for the video, and I had fun making it. And I know it's like, oh, capitalist realism, we're not gonna hustle grind, set our way out of things. But I mean, that is something that I address in the video, right? But I just thought it'll be like a fun approach. And some people liked it, some people didn't like it. Same thing with the tail list. Some people liked that approach, some people didn't like it. And that is, part of just making stuff and putting it on the internet. You're gonna get all kinds of different reactions, and that's fine. As the Chinese say, all that's in it. So I would probably put this particular one on like I'll put this on. I wouldn't change much. Not really. The Does Anarchy need leaders video? Underrated, very underrated, but also, I mean, short, underrated. I think it covers the concept pretty well, pretty straightforwardly. I don't think it left that much room for misinterpretation and misunderstanding, and so I would put it as, underrated. It's a really valuable resource in my opinion, and it was another attempt, I would say, at. I mean, every video that I make is an attempt at me. Is my attempt at communicating the ideas that I hold and understanding them for myself. But this video in particular, like the process of writing it, really helped me to distill my understanding of the topic, what leadership exactly means to me, considering especially the past that I have and the kind of expectations of leadership that were put onto me from a young age. I was able to process that in accordance with my values and come away with something that I think was underrated, but really fantastic. Another underrated video is the Time to Abolish Jet video, which I realize, actually no, because I think I would do something differently with it. The, the video itself took a very long time to actually put together. It was like a lot of sifting through. I don't know if you've ever read Debt. It's a very long, hefty book, right? I read it once a couple of years ago. I had to read through it again, go through it again, make sure I wasn't misunderstanding, misrepresented, and I probably did. And I also did not even go that deeply into all the stuff he talks about, because that video could have easily been much, much, much longer. right? Not that I'm in the business of making particularly long videos, but I ended up, I think, having a bit of an imbalance in terms of what I focused on in that video. And if I were to go about it differently, if I were to go about doing it differently, I would probably take a step back because I was really like deep in making that video. Thank you. I was really deep into making that video, and I think I lost sight at certain points of what exactly was the purpose of making the video in the first place. And so that's probably a video that I could remake or redo or take another stab at a couple years down the line, maybe, if I had more to say about it, of course. I do think I left some open questions, and I think also the process of researching that video, of looking not just at debt itself, but also looking at the reactions to debt, the academic response, the anarchist responses. I've only read a few of academic and anarchist reviews of debt, but it expanded my engagement with the concept, and I think it opened more questions that I have yet to answer. Questions about the nature of money, about the role that money may or may not play, about the history of money, all these different things that I otherwise might have just taken at face value as it was presented. I would want to go in more deeply into it. I do want to talk about more economic stuff, but economics, like history, is like one of those topics that I feel under equipped to engage with in an effective way. I mean, the purpose of the channel is to learn and explore as much as possible, so I do want to eventually surmount that challenge, but priorities, for now, it's not something I'm too focused on. Now, how Gaza exposes the myths of the system. That one I think was really fantastic, but I would change one thing, and that is the idea of doing the ranking. I did the ranking because I wanted to maintain continuity with the previous myths video. I want to keep on like, did myths that time, did myths this time, both times, we could have it with the same tier list, and over time we could expand that tier list, and it could be like a mega project. But I think because that video was shorter, because it was had a more of a focus on the specifics of the situation happening currently, which is the genocide, the tier list felt out of place, and so I would definitely take that out of the video and just present the myths and how Gaza exposes the myths of the system without that framework, you know? Okay, so the next one, I think the next one that I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, what I'm trying to get at is, how Picasso had like a blue period? Picasso had a blue period? Or is that another artist who had a blue period? Okay, that's a manga, apparently. Hold on a second. Picasso. I saw that in the AI overview, even though I tried to avoid those. Yes, so Picasso had a blue period. So Picasso had a blue period. I said all that to say, I think I had like a black period. Just in terms of thumbnail theme. Because I had like 3 videos back to back. They were a bit darker in terms of their visuals, in terms of their focus. And I immediately followed that up with that really bright how to build radical community, video. But these videos I think needed to be made. So the how you being manipulated video was just like this. So there are some topics that I want to talk about for a long time, and so I'm dwelling on it, thinking about it, stewing on it, adding notes, adding little snippets and pieces here, highlighting some things I want to look into. It's like a long process of months, weeks, months, years that I'm putting together the idea of the video before I sit down and actually like work on it. And then I have certain ideas that, well, an example of that would be the debt video, right? The debt video, the revolution as a business video, and the real cost of fashion video. All three of those I'd meant to, and even the leadership video to an extent, I'd meant to do those videos like for months or years before I actually worked on them, right? I have this running list of video topics, and those were among those, right? And then I have certain other video topics where I'm like, let me just, like an idea pops into my head. Ooh, I want to present this concept. I want to talk about this, or this is just floats in my head. I want to put it out there, and I just like work on it, pump it out, boom, boom, boom. And I end up rearranging my schedule sometimes, my video schedule, to put it out before things that I had been working on previously. And so this, how you're being manipulated videos, how you're being manipulated videos. See, I'm trying to talk too fast. I need to slow down. Slow down. And take a deep breath. So this how you're being manipulated video is just one such example. And because it was such like a spur of the moment video, I actually don't even remember what it was about. And I think at this point in like having the channel, I'm like, I have to go back and watch videos to remember what they were about. This one was on what? Social engineering. Yeah. So it was fun, making these little animations and stuff. It was cool. It was a spur of the moment thing. I didn't put too much pressure on it. And I would give it a C. It's alright. It did what it had to do. And I didn't dwell too much on it compared to some other videos. So it's like, however it performs is fine. This next video is another one that I dwelt on for a long time, and that is, can anarchy protect us from bad people? It left a lot of open questions because I don't have the answer. I don't know what exactly will happen. I know that I'm guided by particular values, and those values conflict with certain institutions, certain approaches to justice. They go against my own, and they chafe against my values. And so it just kind of grappling with the difficulty of finding justice, the difficulty of even defining bad people, or dealing with harm versus crime, which is, as we defined it, particularly something that is done against contravention to the state, So I had a good time putting it together. I think I delivered it well in terms of the angles that I wanted to explore. And obviously it's not going to satisfy everybody, because I'm not satisfied in terms of finding an answer, probably because there is no simple, straightforward answer to this issue. I think it's something that people will be grappling with for all of humankind, which is, what does justice look like? Because there'll always be situations, I think, where there's a miscarriage of justice, where mistakes are made, and I think I want to continue dwelling on that and being critical of any approach that claims to offer the final solution. I'm going to put this one in 8 here. And then we had this really fun one. I got to work with an artist for it, and I had a blast making it. And this is the There Will Always Be Monsters video. Another topic that I had like I've been ruminating on for some time. I liked making the visuals for it. I liked the framing of the video as like a little horror Halloween special. It was a nice video, and I wouldn't change very much about it. But it was also, I would say decent, fine, pretty solid. As you can see, my ranking is very biased. I don't think I had any videos this year that I would call undercooked, so I didn't put anything in the detail. But if I go back like past 2025, there are definitely videos that I made that I would call undercooked. But that's not what we're going to be talking about in this particular stream, because I really want to move on to the next set of things that I have planned for the stream. how to build radical community. I would say pretty solid, could do more. I would say pretty solid, could do more, because there's there's angles to the topic which I mention in passing. Things like dealing with reactionary communities and dealing with being with limited infrastructure in terms of car-centric suburbs or rural areas. I touched on those topics and the difficulties with them. I didn't go too deeply into what they meant, or how they can be navigated, rather. So yeah, I would probably be able to build more on top of that if I were to go into like a more specific how to build radical community in rural areas, or how to build radical community in like suburbs or that kind of thing. Those things are difficult to navigate, but not impossible. So don't give up. And yeah, this is my ranking. I think y'all should go and watch the videos that y'all didn't watch, because I will say this year has been kind of difficult. I think the algorithm has been switching up a little bit, and I think the audience appetite has also shifted. YouTube is also just keeps on changing things about how they lay out their website and their app. And there's of course that conspiracy brain side of like, ooh, am I being suppressed? Ooh, am I being blacklisted? Ooh, I don't know. I think going forward with this year, I want to continue working on videos, and I hope that they're able to reach the people they need to reach. I'm appreciative for every view and for every bit of it, interaction and support. This year, though, I think I want to shift toward not just publishing the videos as videos, but also providing scripts, providing the actual scripts, modified, of course, as articles on Substack. And so when I'm ready to like launch that, I'll let you all know. I have a Substack account already, I just haven't started publishing anything yet. But I would want to, maybe a week or 2 weeks after I've released a video, I would drop the article there, which would be slightly modified depending on how the video was originally written. And yeah, have that as another way of reaching people. And I also think that writing and the written word is in some ways superior to visuals in the video, because I could meticulously craft my sentences and write and rewrite, and think about every way that this could be misunderstood in order to try and avoid misunderstanding. But then somebody will still not watch the video and react, or put the video on in the background and not really engage with it fully. They just kind of half pay attention to it and then misrepresent what I'm saying, you know? And I think with the written word, with articles, people could still do that, but I think seeing the text on the screen, reading, the act of reading, the process of reading actively requires a bit more mental engagement, and I think it's easier to be understood on that platform. But then again, Twitter exists, so what the hell am I saying? All right, I need to take a little stand up and stretch, but I'm going to get into the my thoughts on Avatar. I have some thoughts on Avatar that I want to share. So hold on. And then after that, we could talk about probably the current events. Yeah. We'll talk about Avatar, and then we can talk about some of the current events happening around the world, particularly as it relates to Venezuela, Iran, Rojava, Trinidad. I'm not gonna cover every single issue. I'm not a journalist. I'm not like the evening news presenter, but I have some thoughts on these two major topics, which is Venezuela and Iran, and some minor thoughts on the situation in Trinidad right now, situation in Rajava. But yeah, let me take my little break. Oh man, I just realized I'm muted. I was muted that whole time. Oh shoot. Yo, my bad, my bad. Okay, let me start over. All right, so I'm gonna come out and say it. I actually really love the Avatar franchise. I'm a big fan of the Navi. I want to be a Navi. I would love to be immersed in that world. I think one of the main things that I love about Avatar is the world building of it. The way the ecology is fleshed out, the cinematic scope of the story, the fact that James Cameron is pushing to tell this story across like six movies, the way that the visuals require the literal advancement of visual effects technology to be executed, and it shows. It's like beautiful. I never got to see the first movie in theaters, but the second and third movies I have watched on the big screen in IMAX. Now, I wouldn't be spoiling the second and third movies, by the way. I am going to spoil the first one because I think whenever you try to talk about Avatar on the internet, it's a very common reaction that you will get, which is that, it's a white savior story. Could arguably be considered an isekai as well, but it is, or it can be interpreted as a white savior story. And for a lot of people, that's enough to write it off. Right? A lot of people also would argue that it's not very original. Me personally, I don't care about originality when it comes to whether I can enjoy a story or not. But I digress. I think the white savior trope and the conversation around it with regard to Avatar is a lot more. There's a lot more nuance to it. I know that word is people are starting to hate that word these days, but there's a lot more nuance to it than I think a lot of the conversations around the movie rather, appreciate. Because I don't have a settled perspective on it, or I don't have like an extreme on either end perspective. And I think I have a synthesis in terms of my view. Thesis and synthesis. I have a synthesis of my view about whether or not Jake Sully counts as a white savior. Okay, because the classic trope of the white savior is this kind of outsider who comes into an indigenous culture and improves it, saves it, civilizes it for their own good, uplifts them. He's a white savior. Ooh. But I don't think that represents Jake at all, And maybe that's like an outdated, or maybe that's just one way of defining white saviors, which sure, and I'll get to that. So, but based on that sort of colonial look at the white savior, we can kind of see that Jake kind of doesn't do that in the Avatar movie, in the first one at least. He doesn't introduce them to human technology or values. So he does to some extent, but he doesn't like persuade them to adopt it. In fact, he actually ends up rejecting his humanity, rejecting human technology, rejecting human values, and assimilating into Navi culture. In fact, you could argue the movie romanticizes the Navi to the extent where their culture is portrayed as superior to human culture. The humans in the movie are, of course, the villains, and their worldview is not at all subtly framed as being destructive, corrupt, and although he has a pivotal role to play as the main character, Jake is not the one who ends up deciding the fate of the Navi by the end of that movie. Ava is the one who decides that final battle. Now, we could say broadly, okay, but even if there are things missing from it, there is still that element of, okay, Jake is this white outsider. He comes into this indigenous group. He becomes like very skilled very quickly, and he ends up being chosen by their highest power, Ava, to unite the clans and become this legendary Totokbakto, right? In the movie, he's a protagonist. The Navi don't win without him being involved. He becomes their leader. He provides like military intelligence that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And the film is very much around his perspective. So, okay, yeah. And to that, to lend that argument credence, I would say yes, he is a white savior. It's not 100% textbook, but because he has that kind of special outsider element, because he is the protagonist of the story, and because of his role in that story, I could see why that argument is being made. I will say that, he doesn't have to be a white guy, but I have seen arguments as well that the white savior doesn't have to be white to be a white savior, because it's like a trope, and if the conditions apply, it applies, whether the person is white or anything else. But I don't think Jake Sully necessarily had to be white. I don't think there's any elements of the way the story was told that would necessitate him being a white guy. And maybe a couple decades from now, we'll have like an Avatar remake, and there'll be people on the internet complaining that they blackwashed Jake Sully or something. But anyway, so there's that argument that he's not a white savior. There's the argument that he is a white savior. There's an argument kind of in the middle. I hate to be that kind of centrist guy, that there are elements of white saviorness, but that the white saviorness is actively counteracted in the story. Like, if we only want to focus on Jake's agency in the story, that's one thing. But when we start to incorporate the actual agency of the Navi in the story, I think there's room to see where the trope is softened, As the protagonist, he has advantages. He is an outsider, so he does have the advantages that they don't, being that they are culturally ingratiated into this idea that Awa does not interfere and that kind of thing. And because he's an outsider, he doesn't have to like accept that as a given, right? Which is why he ends up kind of praying to Awa, and that leads to Awa intervening, right? But he has, because of his position as an outsider, a role as a kind of a bridge between the worlds. He doesn't have the limits that the scientists had in engagement in Navi, in terms of them trying to find like a very straightforward and scientific explanation for everything that they did. And there's like a spiritual component, except that God is real kind of thing, to the Navi story. But then also Jake has the ability to act as a go-between between the Navi and the RDA, and I say all that to say that Jake ends up being kind of a tool for Awa's ends, and a tool for the Navi to an extent, because they engage with him, they see his flaws. He makes a very critical mistake in betraying them, or causing their... I have to rewatch the first movie, but if I remember correctly, there was a betrayal of critical information that led to Quaritch like attacking the tree, and they end up still welcoming back into the fold, and he ends up playing a critical role in actually saving the day. But he doesn't actually save them, because Awa intervenes. Neytiri saves him multiple times. Neytiri ends up killing Quaritch, and he plays a support role using the information that he has and the inspiration of his accomplishment of becoming Totokbakto. I will say, I think the redemption was a bit too easy. I think his betrayal could have been grappled with a lot more, because it does lead to destruction of their home, leads to a bunch of Navi dying, and they forgive him a bit too quickly. It feels unearned. In the extended cut of the movie, there's a bit more fleshing out there, but it's still very rushed. It's like a him becoming the Turkmakto, it ends up feeling like a shortcut. They just said, okay, well, let's get him back into their good graces, let him do something like really legendary and whoa. Um, and they end up accepting him too quickly. Like, yes, in Turkmakto is this legendary figure, but that doesn't change the fact that, he betrayed them and he led to the destruction of their home. And so it's a bit too quick. The way that the Turk was tamed could have been given more attention. Now, he wasn't the first person to tame a Turkmak, to become a Turkmakto. That has happened in the law of the world like a couple times previously, but it's very rare. It's like a handful of Navi in the past have become Turkmakto. From a storytelling perspective, I would say that you know, uh, major mistake like that would require taking a big swing, a major risk to try and get things back, and that was the risk that he took. But there are other ways that you could have gone about that, I think, without ending up with this framing that like, whoa, this magical outsider came and did what few have done before. I wish there was a version of Avatar that was not focused on Jake's perspective, because I think that would have get left a lot more room for seeing the Navi side of things and seeing their reasoning behind their decisions a bit more. We see a lot of their reasoning, of course, and we see that they have a lot of tensions and perspective differences of their own within their culture in terms of how to deal with the threat of the RDA, the threat of the humans. But having like a movie entirely focused on them and on their dealings with each other and with humans, or even before the humans arrive, that would be kind of cool. I think it would also be cool to tell a story where like you have Avatar with a protagonist that is not white, and that means something. Because I said earlier that, from what I could tell, Jake could be any race. I don't think it would change the story at all, or it doesn't have to change the story at all, rather. But then the argument could be made that, okay, if Jake wasn't white, though, then if we were telling that story with a non white person, the story would feel undercooked or incomplete if it didn't grapple with perhaps that non white character mourning colonization or processing colonization and processing even being an agent of colonization in another land. Obviously, to a limited extent, because eventually that non white character would also betray the RDA and end up fighting with the Navi. That would be a cool story to explore. That is something that I feel people could write as well. You probably would have to change some things in terms of, not facing copyright issues, but you could tell a story like that, engaging with aliens and sci-fi, in a sci-fi setting, but telling that story. I'm sure maybe a story like that already exists. Maybe somebody was already inspired by Avatar or by other stories, because people can draw inspiration from all over the place and come to similar stories in the end. Maybe somebody has told that story. If so, I would love to see a recommendation for it, where you do have this kind of space colonization as a proxy for conversations around colonization in Earth's history, told from the perspective of somebody who turns coat and becomes a decolonizing force within the story. Maybe I could tell that story. Who knows? And so, I guess in closing, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Avatar has elements of white saviorness in the story, but then it also challenges those elements. I think subverts all those elements. I don't think it's a clean example either way. And I wish that the conversation on Avatar wasn't just boiled down to, this fits this trope and this is this trope. I think the reduction of art to like basic tropes is pretty boring. Like I enjoy going on TV tropes from time to time, but that's not how I like to consume media and talk about media. I don't like talking about, okay, this is the such and such trope and this is the that trope. Like I would rather just talk about the story rather than like trying to classify the taxonomy of the story according to the tropes listed on tvtropes.com. And so I will concede at the end of the day that, if you're not convinced, if you still see it as like 100% a white savior story, you don't like it, that's fine. If you see it as not a white savior story, I see that perspective as well. If you're like me and you're kind of torn between the two camps in terms of the perspective, that's cool too. And in any case, I would say that the movie is flawed, and you can like something that is flawed. You can enjoy something that is not like a moral, ethical paragon, you know? And that is my take. So I'm now going to open the chat and take in some responses. Everyone always just wants a big dumb popcorn movie. I mean, it's a nice popcorn movie. I wouldn't call it I think it's nice. I think it's obviously there could be more. Like there's always things that could be improved in terms of how you tell a story, like in retrospect, especially if you're not the one telling the story, because the storyteller has their perspective and then you come in with a fresh perspective. And so you're going to have takes on it and perspectives on it that they would have missed entirely. But I like it for what it is. If Sully was another nationality or another race, I fully believe it would be a different story. Even if his actions are the same, it changes the story. I guess on a meta level, yeah, it would change, I guess, how we perceive it, because we're coming into the story with the baggage of recent European colonization. It's hard to not see a white guy being in that role in a sci-fi setting, even though he ends up betraying that role entirely. That baggage does still end up carrying into the story. The issue is that Avatar is so shallow, it's not much there for critical analysis. I mean, I don't think I agree. I think that it's simple, but even in its simplicity, there's a beauty to it. I think because there are a lot of different perspectives being presented in the story. You have a spectrum of human perspectives, you have a spectrum of Navi perspectives, and then you also just have the ecology is worthy of analysis. You have the whole element of Ava as was yet to be fully explored and fleshed out as a character, I would admit, but it looks like they're going in that direction in future movies. I will say it without spoiling the second and third movie too much. It's not like, oh my god, like you need to have an extremely high IQ in order to understand Avatar. Like it's not like, oh, big brained story or anything. But I wouldn't discount it as shallow either. Let me drink some more drink. And I just hope that the the Avatar fans appreciated the conversation. I don't expect to change anybody's mind on it. I think people have like a really strong opinions on Avatar, and that's cool. I just I have strong opinions too. They're different from yours. Okay, what's next? Okay, I'll start with the local situation and then I'll get into what's happening in the neighboring Venezuela and then we'll talk about Iran. So I think first of all, I should provide some context. What's happening in China right now is we have this wannabe Trump of a leader, a woman by the name of Kamala Prasad. I gave some background on her in a previous live stream, so you can go and check that. But let's say she's a wannabe Trump. She was backing all of Trump's actions in the region. She was calling for sanctions on Trinidad back when she was an opposition leader because Trinidad was doing business with Venezuela. She's a party first politician through and through, and she's been copying from Trump's playbook for the past few years. And she also famously said, kill them all violently in response to the US bombing of ships in the Caribbean Sea. Ships that the US has alleged without any evidence and in violation of international law, regardless, were carrying drugs. Right? Even after 2 Trinidadians were killed in these boat bombings, she's still Trump all the way, gung ho, you know? Trinidad has a crime situation, a crime problem. You know, we have a lot of intra-community violence, domestic violence, you know, trafficking, drug trafficking, human trafficking, all those different issues. Robberies, home invasions, car thefts, the usual stuff. It is an issue, I don't deny that. But Kamala has no solutions to that issue, right? Since she came into power, she's had the country under a state of emergency. The very same approach, not being a state of emergency, that she criticized as opposition leader is the same approach that she went ahead and used herself throughout most of her prime ministership, you know, since she became prime minister. I think the purpose of the state of emergency is twofold. I think for one, it is because they have no real solutions and they just want to have like the aesthetics of doing something, the concept of a plan, to put it in Trump's words. And then I also think that it serves to suppress and prevent political, to suppress and prevent political organization and political unrest. So we have been under this state of we've been under this state of emergency for a couple months now since she came into being prime minister in April. And because she cannot continue to extend the state of emergency, she's introduced a law to Parliament that has already passed the lower house and is looking to be debated in the upper house tomorrow, which is Tuesday. Right? By the time if this section of the stream has been clipped, by the time it comes out, that discussion may have been had in Parliament already, and whether it passed or did not pass is really up to a couple independent senators in that debate to determine whether that bill gets passed or not. So if you're in the future, you may already have seen how it turned out. But if you're here in the present, I just want to raise awareness about what it is that is being introduced. All right, this is a law called the Zones of Special Operations. Actually, no, that's not the literal name of the law. Let me find the literal name of the law. This is let me find it. Does anybody in the chat have the name of the law? I'm trying to find that. Let me go on Parliament website so I can find it. Yeah, that is the Law Reform, Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures Bill 2026. Now, this law basically lets the government declare entire communities zones of special operations, right? This is them pulling up in a neighborhood, slapping the label zone of special operations on it, and then you basically don't have any rights in the area at all, right? They're borrowing from Jamaica's playbook because Jamaica has a similar bill that they've had in place for some time now. And this is just an allowance for the Prime Minister to declare areas, zones of special operations, where the police and the soldiers could lock down that area, search people without warrants, impose curfews, and override parts of the Constitution. And obviously, if you have sense and you know much about governments, you would not expect the government to protect your rights in a situation like that, right? The police force is already very much a corrupt, violent, ineffective solution to the issue of crime, often involved in crime themselves. And there's already been reports, I didn't look into it, but I got a little WhatsApp already about police beating and killing a guy before this bill has even passed, right? I have to look into this story. I can't really talk about it live right now because I don't have all the facts. But this is not the first time that's happened, right? And so we already don't expect the police to handle the responsibilities and the allowances that they already have. And now they're being given more power to abuse. Even in these past couple of months, the police have been power tripping on people over like traffic tickets. The government doubled the price of a bunch of traffic fines, doubled a bunch of traffic fines, and then also added new traffic fines. And then they have all these roadblocks all over the country to just like impose fines on people for the most basic of things, as like their tail lights getting blown, or like a little chip in their windshield, or having a sticker on the windshield, or any number of things, right? And this is coming from the government that campaigned on no more raising of the fines, and the previous government was using the fines as a fundraising measure, and that's the purpose of the fines. Now they're using the fines as a fundraising measure to the extent where they would double the fines and also increase enforcement. And somehow this police force, which is clearly incentivized to victimize people as it is being given more power. And this has nothing to do with safety, it has nothing to do with being a solution to crime. We have an inequality problem in the country, we have a housing problem in the country, we have a poverty problem in the country. And instead, the state is sending in armed forces to occupy its own territory. And the territory in question is the most disenfranchised, the most marginalized people in the country. They're not sending the soldiers and the police to go and occupy the wealthy neighborhoods that finance the criminal networks in the first place, that bring in the drugs and bring in the guns. They're going after the small fries, not the big cheeses. And you have people who cheer these things on, who say yes because they're desperate, and I get that. You're desperate about the fact that you're living in fear, that you're always hearing about people getting robbed, people getting held up in buses and in maxi taxis with just traveling nation's roadways, people getting targeted, people have been dealing with home invasions. That's a traumatizing experience, right? And they're dealing with being robbed all over the place. It's not a nice experience at all. People losing their lives, people getting kidnapped. It's not nice. And so people are celebrating this as if it's a solution, but it's not a solution. It's targeting areas and inflicting collective punishment. That's just because you're living in an area or working in an area or passing through an area, all of a sudden you're a suspect. And you have curfews to contend with and warrantless searches because somebody don't like how you're looking, and military men coming up into your house and coming into your business. And now, supposedly in the law, there's oversight involved. There's supposed to be checks and balances, quote unquote, but it's mostly internal reports written by the same people doing the policing. There's a pattern of corruption in this country as it is, and if That's not sound like corruption times two to you? I don't know what to say. We see this kind of thing over and over again in this country. They're basically telling people that you have nothing to worry about, that we will investigate ourselves. Because there's no external body or external organization. It's just like, yeah, you have to trust the governments to investigate themselves and find no wrongdoing, right? I think what people who are cheering this on don't realize as well is when you normalize this kind of abuse, it gets easier for them to inflict more abuse in the future. Not that they need much of a justification, because they don't face any significant challenge from the people right now. We have yet to really stand up for ourselves collectively as a people. But this is a vast increase to the power of the executive, and it's also making it easier for them to justify and enable abuses later on. Because if they get away with doing this, then they can get away with passing even more draconian laws in the future. And so you might be comfortable now, you're saying to yourself, this law is not going to affect me. I'm not a criminal. I don't live in them areas, in them hot spots or whatever. But if you don't stand up here now, it'll just be harder to stand up in the future. You know, they could very easily say, well, actually, your area is a hotspot too, if they want to abuse it for political ends. I noticed in the name of the bill, right? It's called the Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security, and Community Development Measures Bill. Right now, the community development measures, they have this idea of a social transformation committee within the bill itself. This is a classic politician tactic. You take something that is like clearly, blatantly evil and corrupt, and then you like slip some nice something into it to say, oh yeah, this is actually like what you want this law to pass and get this good thing. I think I saw something similar in the US. I don't remember the details of the situation, but if I remember correctly, there was like an infrastructure bill that needed to pass, and there was like an attempt to fold a bunch of other things into that bill and have it all pass as a package. And some of the things in that bill is like clearly evil. Anyway, I don't remember the details on that situation, so I digress. So yes, there's a social transformation committee in the bill, but the state's funding, like we've seen a pattern of this, the state's funding is not really going to be going towards that aspect of the bill. They're not going to be putting in the main bulk of any funding towards these measures, toward actual housing and infrastructure and education and counseling. They're going to be putting that money towards the violence, the military and police occupation of these neighborhoods. In fact, I think it's an insidious thing that they do, right? It's like they take these bills and they slip them in, they set them up to fail. They never give them enough resources to actually do what they need to do to thrive. And then they could point to it and say, oh, well, look, we have social programs, and look, the state of the country. You all saying crime is caused by poverty. Well, look, we have programs in place, and then doing nothing. If you look at history and you look around the world, I think you can see that this state violence and more state violence does not bring the solution to these issues. It may scratch some reptilian itch in the base of your skull that just wants tit for tat violence, for bloodshed, eye for an eye, or worse. But this kind of violence does not create a safe, stable, and lasting solution. It just brings the same kind of criminality, and worse in some cases, just with the cover of a police uniform or a soldier's uniform. And I'm talking to my people, and we are doing what we can to agitate around this issue. Things we're kind of scrambling to scrape things together right now to actually get the communications happening, because we do want to address this issue. This is a major leap towards dictatorship more so than any similar, more so than many of the other moves that the government has made as of late. And they have been making a lot of these kinds of, you know, moves toward Trump style governance. And so for the trainees in the audience, I just wanted to talk about the bill. For those outside, just want to inform a bit about what's happening locally. A lot of the tensions being dealt with. Because of course there's also the concern of, the racial component, because the political party in power right now, the UNC, led by Kamala Persad-Bissessar, our Prime Minister, is racist. I'm just gonna put it plainly. They're a racist party. They're supported by passionate racists, and they have a cult of personality around Kamala, who is herself a racist. And so there's racial tensions building as a result of this. There are class tensions building, and as of yet, there's not been, I think, a robust enough communication and counter propaganda around this issue, which was just kind of sprung on us, by the way, last week. They just spring this bill onto us and they start pushing it aggressively, and they pass it in the lower house. It's like they're trying to pass it as quickly as possible, so we barely have any chance to react, to respond, to organize around it. And I mean, that's a failure of organizing infrastructure that we have to, work on to be able to, I guess, mobilize more quickly in the future. I'm doing what I can, other people doing what they can. We just need to be doing more and agitating and educating and hoping for the best at this point. Hi. All right. Next up, I want to talk about our next door neighbor, Venezuela. Now, I have limited knowledge about everything. There's so much to know, and there's so much you can't know. There's so much obfuscation of information from all kinds of different sides. And so I want to preface this by saying that I am coming from limited information. I've done some looking into the situations, and I'm just sharing what I've learned and my perspective. Every information source is going to have its biases, and it's very, very difficult to sift through and find the truth. The best thing you could do is, I think, identify biases in the stuff that you're reading, and identify your own biases and how that's, affecting your reading of things as you're seeking the truth. So Trinidad has always been neighbors with Venezuela, since Trinidad and Venezuela have been countries, because that's just plain geography, right? We have often exchanged people. We have had connections in our economies, and the economic crisis that they've been dealing with has been felt over here because a lot of Venezuelans have ended up migrating to Trinidad, legally and illegally. On the diplomatic front, the previous government of Trinidad maintained a neutral position, a non-interventionist position, in terms of respecting the sovereignty of Venezuela, despite the controversy surrounding the election that took place. They would continue to engage with the government that was in power. Like I mentioned, Kamala, who was opposition at the time, she didn't like that. She was calling on sanctions on Trinidad for continuing to engage with the Maduro government. So I spoke about some of this background in the previous live stream that I keep on referencing. So you could go to that live stream in the live stream playlist and find it. But there's been some moves since then. Some big moves since then. Starting with, of course, the kidnapping of Maduro, which I condemn unequivocally. Not only the kidnapping of Maduro and his wife, but also the slaughter of Venezuelan citizens through the United States invasion into the country. I want an end to US intervention in the entire region, including the sanctions that they're inflicting on Venezuela, on Cuba. Don't get it twisted. I think the Bolivarian revolution has a lot of problems. I think the government has a lot of issues, which we'll get to. But that position does not change the fact that the American intervention is wrong. It does not change the fact that the solution has not and will never be found in American invasion. Okay? So I've been doing, like I said, some research here and there, right? I've been looking into the situations going on and trying to look at multiple perspectives. I'm looking at, of course, Venezuela analysis, which has their clear biases, of course, but also provides a lot of information that you would not really get in other places. You could see, for example, in this article, by the way, if you want to read any of these articles, just look at the URL and find it yourself. You can look at the title as well, look at the website name, and you can go and Google it, right? There's certain things that I get from Venezuela analysis, despite their biases, that I just wouldn't get from other places. They talk about the government subsidized health program, subsidized food program, housing mission, the computer program, the subsidies to housewives, the pension program, basic social democracy, social programs. Nothing wrong with that. They have communes as well, which are part of their property system. They have private property, public property, social property, and direct social property, right? And there's a theory and vision to it, which they talk about here, but there's actually a reality of the limits of that actual commune system in Venezuela. And I mean, communes are not the be all and end all of my political goals, but I can respect what it is that they were trying to do, even though I don't fully align with it. Because there is this kind of attempt to integrate the communes into the government, but then there's also a trend within Venezuela of people trying to avoid that integration and maintain the autonomy of the communes. Right, so there's a back and forth between multiple camps there. Right, there are a couple of things that have been wearing down the vision of the communes. Right, you have the people in government who are opposing the power of the communes naturally, preventing them from actually having a say in the policies in their regions. You have also the creation of the Ministry of the Communes, which degraded the vision of the communal state because it ended up kind of segmenting or segregating the communes as a project or as a program from the rest of the government, and made it seem as though the communes were just limited to that sphere of influence rather than having their own say in their own affairs, cutting across ministries, right? And so there was little progress in terms of the actual development of the communes, and yeah, and so that's what I've picked up on so far, that there are commune efforts within the country, within Venezuela. I've listened to a couple interviews, read a couple articles on the subject, and I've realized that there are many perspectives on the communes. There are many, I think, failures of the communes and successes of the communes in terms of how they're executed, in terms of the resources they have available to them, in terms of the actual involvement of people in them. Some communes are really robust and well organized, and other communes are not as much, you know? And so kind of looking at the perspectives of Venezuela come from multiple sides. This is one perspective that has a pro-government slant. We'll get to some of the other perspectives shortly. And I think it's worth addressing that you can't really, I think it's very difficult to actually navigate the Bolivarian project and what the different forces in the country are trying to do, because all of them are putting up with, encirclement, the US imposed economic sanctions. All of the programs they're trying to do, social democracy, basic social democracy stuff, and also some of the interesting experiments they're doing with communes and that kind of thing. That is in an environment where they're feeling the squeeze of the US economic sanctions, right? And so a lot of the programs and the policies that may have been thriving or may have provided us with a lot more insight in terms of what's worth exploring, those things have been hampered by the US's economic sanctions. And so I think that is worth keeping in mind. I've also been looking at anarchist perspectives on the situation in Venezuela prior to, the more recent incidents. This one is from like 2017. We have the Anarchist Federation of Central America and the Caribbean speaking as anarchists who live in lands adjacent to Venezuela. They're saying that our similarities and empathy are directed to the anonymous Venezuelan people who did not wait for favorable conditions and didn't take seriously the so-called end of the story, and who carried out Caracazo in 1989, the first big popular uprising in the world against the consummation of the neoliberal policies that would be later implemented everywhere else. Right? This is providing some background prior to the situation right now. They provide a kind of a stance, a statement of stances here. They speak about calling out the National Police, National Guard, the military, who continue to support the authoritarian murderous state, stand against the paramilitary collective, stand against the violence in the media belonging to the opposition politicians, which only seek to agitate the polarization among the political machines in order to force a simple replacement of oppressors as an alleged way out of the current crisis. We stand with those young people who, in Maracay, raised a sign which read neither MUD nor PSUV. Right? These are the main political parties in Venezuela. PSUV being Maduro's party, MUD being like a liberal party. We are the ones from below who come for the ones above, because the situation cannot be solved with a change of government. They call out some of the issues still plaguing the country, even with Chavez's rise, his charismatic rise, the oil-related nationalist obsession, the political clientelism, the messianic warlordism, chauvinistic cult of strong males, and that's really one of the main things that's rubbed me the wrong way about, I think, the Bolivarian project, among other things, the state aspect of it as well. But whenever you have a situation where there's this cult of personality, this kind of centralization or a coalescing around this figure, I think it ends up setting things up for failure down the line. It ends up creating problems. We could watch my video on great man theory. I did a video on that. I also did a video on political cults, also worth looking at. That kind of focus on personalities, I think, is really detrimental, because the aim would be to actually empower people, right? Not to encourage them to relinquish their power towards some messianic figure, some savior who's going to get them out of their situation. The purpose of the social movement, the idea, the concept of liberation, is that you are putting power in people's hands. People have been deprived of power. They've been deprived of their ability to self-determine. They've been deprived of knowledge and autonomy, and I say in their own affairs, the ability to move freely and to associate and disassociate with who they wish. They're forced into economically coercive circumstances and politically coercive circumstances. And any serious liberation has to start with equipping people with the ability to challenge their own situation, to challenge themselves, to go further and to take more into their own hands than they've done previously, not to follow the next leader into salvation. Also, some statements here made by Communists, right, which is a publication in Venezuela. You have the statement against the US's deployment of military forces in August. This is before a lot of the bombings were taking place. It constitutes an open and brazen threat to national sovereignty of any country in the region. And the tragedy is that this is happening at a time when Nicolas Maduro's government has decided to implement the most brutal economic austerity measures against the working class, ban the revolutionary left, and persecute social movements. And they make a statement calling for, building authentic and popular national unity. I'm quickly going over a lot of these perspectives because I think there's this fixation on picking sides and boiling things down to simple narratives. And I'm just providing these resources so you could go on your own and do your own research and look into the situation. It doesn't complicate the rightness or wrongness of the invasion, of course. The invasion is still wrong. But if you're following this channel, you're probably interested in more than simply talking about that. We have more to the story worth exploring. So there's another conversation here. The Maduro government fears the people. This is another communique. It's not the first time the government, a series of acts of government repression against the people, right? The attacks on mothers, the arrest and disappearance of Martalia Grajales. They have the detainment of workers' leaders and unions. They're continuing to persecute popular struggles and progressive sectors inside Venezuela. Right? As it shifts to the right and towards capital, this government further represses popular protests and becomes increasingly fearful of leftist and progressive positions that expose its betrayal. It prefers 1,000 times over a false polarization with far opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, from which it benefits and is able to sustain its precarious internal cohesion, than to have to respond to people's demands and criticism from the left. Basically, what they're saying is the government would rather have this right-wing crazow of an alternative be propped up as the only alternative to avoid having to deal with the actual radical challenges to their policies. As government spokespersons have justified this repressive barrage by arguing that the country is under siege from the US and right-wing terrorists. For government acolytes, it is never a good time to protest or criticize. They act like the good cops of the peace of the cemetery. They are right, but this is not the time to raise such criticisms. And you see this a lot, right? I'm sure I may even face this criticism myself, that this is not a good time to talk about these things because such and such. It's never going to be a good time. It's never going to be convenient to those in power to criticize or challenge their power. Maduro may not be in power right now because of the unjust invasion by the US, the unjust and illegal invasion by the US. The rest of his government is still in power, and they are just as culpable and just as worthy of targeting and criticism as Maduro himself, even though his current circumstances should not be. Even Venezuela analysis offers some critique, right? In this review, we speak about the privatization of state-run enterprises, campesino protests, workers' struggle to control factories, police murders of young men from the barrios. On those counts, the Maduro government disappoints the left. It compromises. It cedes ground to the right. And then they say, but it is under siege. As if that excuses it. As if being under siege makes it okay. As if being under siege means that, like, you had to, like, go and kill some youths in the ghetto. Sorry, the US has encircled us. So there's no. No, and this framing, I think, is issues I have of Venezuelan analysis, even though I get a lot of valuable information from them. It's not. I'll put this. It's bias towards the government in many of the articles from them that I've read constantly discounts their credibility because you don't have to concede things like that. This, but it's under siege, undercuts your honest engagement with the issues in the country, in my opinion. Especially when you follow it up with, and it's better than the only alternative on offer, a gangster opposition headed by a ridiculous pretender, Juan Guaido, crowned in absentia by regime change maniacs in Washington. This came out in 2020. So Guaido was the guy at that point in time. That's not the only alternative. The only alternative is not. There are many. I want you to pay attention to the way that false binaries are set up, right? And this book is, I think, the focus of the review of this article. They're speaking about government harassment of the communes and the logic of corruption, bureaucracy, and clientelism. They criticize, some less cautiously than others, Maduro's tilt toward capitalism as an exit from the economic crisis. But all 35 appear to agree, some only implicitly, which I think is, I haven't read the book, but with the bias already demonstrated in the article, I question whether this is being read into what they're saying dishonestly. But anyway, but all 35 appear to agree, some only implicitly, that with the right-wing resurgent, it is time to close ranks. Half a loaf is better than none. These leaders and intellectuals willing to sacrifice and support Maduro's government against a rapacious imperial aggressor from abroad who seeks to foment fascism at home. The government do well to respond constructively to their concerns. Instead, it appears to take such reports for granted, or worse, to undermine them. I don't think that you need to rally behind a government in order to oppose imperial aggression. I don't think that you should silence your criticism of your government or of policies and practices that are negatively affecting you because of this kind of geopolitical chess. Right? There's some other things I highlighted here from this article, Anarchist Perspectives in Venezuela. 3 distinct anarchist responses to Chavismo: the lesser evil approach, the makes no difference attitude, and the grand destruction analysis. So you have those who really don't, who really think, Chavez could have been better. Chavez was better than the opposition would have been. Valid, right? You have neither better nor worse perspective that he's kind of neither here nor there. And there's a perspective that he's actually worse because of his popular persona as a reformer and anti-imperialist. When Chavez could have forced through the range of petroleum and other resource concessions to multinational corporations that have been approved in recent years, because these same maneuvers would have faced massive resistance had they been proposed by the opposition. Second, Chavez has used his social reforms, literacy programs, etc., to cover for a massive centralization of political power in the hands of the presidency, where the opposition would have been confronted as authoritarian extremists had they attempted the same power grab. These 3 perspectives did not seem mutually exclusive. And so, you can look at all these articles, you can disagree with me, you can form your own perspective. I just wanted to share some of what I've been reading about, some of the perspectives, some of the critical perspectives and less critical perspectives on the situation in Venezuela, the political reality. And hopefully, with that perspective, we can take more seriously our politics. We can take more seriously our engagement with the complex issues in countries, and not simply flatten them and boil them down to these binaries, these narratives that, you have to pick, this side or the other side. You can't walk and chew gum at the same time, basically. Moving on to Iran now, right? I think my problem with a lot of the analysis on Iran and Venezuela is that it ends up treating the people in these countries as just chess pieces for geopolitics. They don't get to be like full people. And you see that from both camps, right? You see it from the pro-American camp and the anti-American camp. Now, I try to understand where everyone's coming from, right? So I get that at times in history, even up to the present, Iran has been a counterbalance to Israel's ambitions in the region. And I know Israel is at the forefront of a lot of people's minds right now for very good reason, because they're carrying out a genocide. So Iran being a counterbalance to Israel's power and Israel's ambitions is seen as a good thing. Now that Iran being a counterbalance didn't stop Iran from receiving military aid from Israel during the Iran-Iraq war, because at the end of the day, material interests trump ideology. But Iran does currently arm the Palestinian resistance. Obviously not out of the goodness of their hearts, because if they actually had a consistent line, they wouldn't be trying to preserve their control over the Kurds and the Balochis in their own territory so badly. They wouldn't be so violently against any exercise of autonomy against the minorities in their country if they had a consistent line, if it was about actual values and not geopolitical interests. And I think it's a good thing that the Palestinian liberation struggle has some tangible support. But I don't think that means that the Iranians have to like sit back and wait until Palestinians are freed to seek their own freedom from a theocracy. If they want change now, they want change now. Political realism does not have a factor in there. And even that change might mean different things to different people, even within the country and especially outside the country. Right? In America, you have all types of people and ideologies showing up to your protests. Right? You have hoteps, you have just like an example from Black Lives Matter, right? You have your hoteps, you have your Nation of Islam people, you have your Christians, Muslims, you have people in cults, you have Marxists, you have anarchists, you have liberals, all types of people came out for Black Lives Matter with different political motivations. And I think you do people outside of your bubble a disservice when you flatten them, right? To a simple story of one ideology, right? Because Iran also has a medley of people and ideologies, rightists and leftists. You know, the actual anti imperialist alternatives in the country don't even have any room to breathe. And yes, there are Iranians who are pro Israel, pro America, pro monarchy. Obviously, the CIA and Mossad would get involved. But it's this kind of conspiracist tendency to attribute everything to these three-letter agencies. You can't boil down something so you can't boil it down to something as simple as the protesters are all CIA, Mossad, monarchist, Zionist operatives and deserve to be crushed. Obviously, the US and Israel are going to try and take advantage of the situation. But the CIA and Mossad, they're not magic. They're not gods. They're not puppet masters pulling all the strings and flipping switches to spark protests. They have one influence among many. Propaganda is coming from all sides, everywhere, and beyond that, Iranians have their own grievances, their own reasoning, their own resentments, economic resentments and issues. They have violence that they face, religious tyranny, because it is a theocracy, and the suppression of information that is even taking place now. And so, whenever people rise up anywhere in the world, there's a risk of the efforts being co-opted. But regional and global powers are going to try to eke out an advantage for themselves. But just because they are opportunists and imperialists in the mix, in the resistance, that doesn't mean that they are the ones who started it or are capable of determining its fate. And it doesn't mean that you abandon solidarity or worse yet, side with the people oppressing the population. Because if you think about it, the shoe is on the other foot, right? There was evidence that ooh, right? There was evidence that Russia got involved in, stirring the pot during the Black Lives Matter movement, right? During the protests, both in 2020 and before that. That doesn't mean that Russia started the Black Lives Matter movement. That doesn't mean that Russia could single-handedly determine the fate of the Black Lives Matter movement. for all its flaws, for all its contradictions, for all its diversity of perspectives and interpretations. And yes, there are things the CIA has done historically that are fodder for conspiracy, but it's actually true. But that doesn't mean that you lean into that conspiracy thinking. You still have to critically challenge that impulse to find these kind of esoteric explanations for and simple explanations for these complex situations. And so instead of trying to determine, which voice can I elevate as because it aligns with my own, to the Americans and the Europeans and the audience, I would say do something in your country to hamstring their rampant imperialism. Do something to prevent the US and Mossad. Well, I don't know what you can do for Mossad. I don't think I have any Israeli followers, but do what you can to act as a block to stand up against and intervene against US intervention, that people around the world should be able to could rise up and deal with their issues and find their own solutions without having to face the threat of US meddling. Right? The responsibility is on the people in the US to do something about that. Not to sit back and tell people, oh, you now is not a good time to rise up because it's not in our geopolitical interest as anti-imperialists, quote unquote. Anti-imperialists TM. I say again, beware of these false binaries that get put forward, right? There's this campus rhetoric that you either support the Islamic Republic or you support Israel, that you have to choose a lesser evil, that you cannot oppose imperialism and also oppose theocracy. It's like, ooh, pick a fascist. You actually don't have to pick. That's the anti-imperialism of idiots. There's an article on that. That's the anti-imperialism of idiots, on repeat. Or if you talk about Iran killing protesters, that means you're back in the US. No. Me talking about the actions of other countries does not give America a blank check or build their case. That's not how this works. Right? America will do what it wants to do regardless of what's real or not. They'll invent stuff if necessary. They don't need popular support or narratives to act. Right? And especially because I don't even live in America. There's nothing much that I can do. What I say on this issue really doesn't make a difference. Sad to say. Me declaring where my allegiances lie, which is with the people, doesn't affect the outcome. It's not a betrayal of Palestine. And the least that I could do is to continue to pursue the truth, to sift through all the propaganda and the lies that gets, tussled up whenever these kind of incidents happen, and continue to maintain my values and seek out the truth. Speaking of the truth, there's an article I saw on Al Jazeera the other day that I think makes very valid arguments regarding the levels of scrutiny that get applied to death counts. How we count deaths in different situations. The framing of it is a little bit shaky. Right? But I think it brings up an important point. Excuse me a second. Let me just yeah. Iran, Gaza, and the politics of counting the dead. As Western media accepts death tolls from Iran at face value, Palestinian deaths in Gaza remain endlessly questioned, revealing how belief follows power, not evidence. Right, for 2.5 years, Western media scrutinized every dead Palestinian, the ways in which their bodies were maimed, broken, and burned in Gaza. Were they real people? If they were they truly dead? If dead, were they actually killed by Israel's bombs, bullets, torture, and siege? If they were killed, how could anyone know they were not combatants and thus actually, quote-unquote, deserved it? even the death toll periodically released by the Gaza Health Ministry, widely acknowledged to be a massive undercount, was repeatedly questioned. This number, vast undercount, right? July 2024 study published in The Lancet put the figure at more than 186,000, with hundreds of thousands of more, no doubt, having lost their lives to bombs, bullets, avoidable illnesses, and hunger since. The health ministry has a very rigorous documentation of the deaths in Gaza, and yet still they were facing extreme scrutiny. The Western media will publish that it's disputed by Israel, cannot be confirmed, merely claimed by the Hamas-run health ministry. Right? And now Iran, people are taking to the streets to resist the regime and are being killed as they do so. But they're not handling the same violence in the same way. Because Iran is an enemy of the West, they're taking reports from human rights agencies at face value. It is difficult to get the actual numbers in Iran because there is a media blackout, right? It can't be verified right now. I think it's important to point out the hypocrisy of the Western media, that they apply a far lower threshold for credibility when it comes to Iranian deaths because it serves the interests of empire. Obviously, this is not to say that Iranians resisting the regime are not dying. It's not to say that they should not be believed or that their deaths should be ignored because they're difficult to count or because the regime restricts information. Their struggle matters, their deaths matter, every innocent death matters. But as we listen to Iranians resisting the regime, we must not ignore the hypocrisy of media outlets that amplify their story while simultaneously transforming their struggle into a convenient pretext for imperial intervention. All right, you can check out this article on your own if you wish. There are a variety of estimates right now about what the death toll is. And part of the problem is just the nature of this kind of suppression of information that takes place under dictatorships. They don't allow independent journalism, so you're not able to verify things. And there are many agents of all positions sowing the seeds of doubt and confusion to hamper efforts. You have people who are probably making overestimates, which, if you question them, it paints you in a poor light, and you have people making vast underestimates. It's similar to why you won't see Israel allowing independent journalists into Gaza to investigate what's happening there. It's the same way Iran is not going to allow people to just actively investigate what's happening, right? Iran doesn't want to be honest about the death toll, how many people they've killed. Israel and America don't want the death toll to be open regarding Palestine. And so yes, there's Western hypocrisy. There's hypocrisy in the Western media regarding people's lives, whose lives matter, what scrutiny is placed on people's lives and deaths. Water is wet. They're hypocrites. They will condemn government narratives and oppression in other countries, but then they'll turn around and support ICE and government narratives about ICE's actions in their own country. This is, reactionaries I'm talking about. On the flip side, you have the people who condemn ICE and government narratives about ICE in their own country, in the United States, and then they will turn around and support government oppression and government narratives about that oppression in another country. There's been news recently about the Kurds facing violent oppression in Syria right now. My heart goes out to them. Rojava has been pretty much packed up by the Syrian government. And yeah, it's easy to point out that there was a time when Western media was more invested in their struggle than they are now. Right? When it served the interests of the West, they supported them. When it no longer served their interests, they abandoned them. But pointing out simple hypocrisy is a very baby's first politics to me. I'm very tired of it, and I wish that people would go deeper. Western hypocrisy doesn't make Iranian lives disposable, and it shouldn't be used to pit Palestinian lives against Iranian lives, as if caring for one means that you could just dispose of the other. There are lots of pro-Palestinian Iranians right now who are seeking support, and they're being met with hostility and accusations of Zionism and being Mossad. All that being said, though, regarding solidarity with the people facing government oppression right now, and the narratives surrounding that oppression, I hate to make predictions, but I do see a couple very likely outcomes of these protests if they're not quelled. I think one of the likelier outcomes is a regime change that receives Western support, Zionist support, toes their lines and interests, and will have a long path toward actual stabilization, if it ever achieves that. Just looking within the country at which factions are most likely to gather the international support. If you see what Western media is putting forward, that is what they want. They want that outcome, they're pushing for that outcome. Still, the Western powers are not all powerful, right? They could very likely fail to install a regime like that, and much like in similar situations and how things turned out in Libya, for example, there could be a civil war. A civil war involving the IRGC loyalists, most likely, secessionists within Iran, other interest groups, for years, potentially decades. Right? And I understand why people point to Syria and Iraq and Libya and they warn about those things, right? Like I said earlier, Syria, with their new government, is just packing up the concept of Kurdish autonomy entirely. And Libya, to this day, is still divided. And as far as I'm aware, there isn't an organized, robust, networked alternative in place to assert something radically different. I could be wrong. It could be that in these past few weeks that the people have been organizing something capable of challenging these outcomes, behind that information blackout, but I wouldn't know. So I can only surmise from where I am where things seem to be going. And it seems the Iranian people are stuck between a rock and a hard place, a frying pan and a fire. That doesn't mean I'm going to turn against their struggle. And I will ask that the anti-imperialist Americans, instead of sitting back and rooting for the RDC, as I've seen some people do, that you step forward, that you do what is within your power to prevent your own state from stepping in to exploit the situation. Be actual allies to the international workers of the world. You have a very sanction, trigger happy government. And I would say to go out and protest against the government sanction nations, because sanctions don't work. They don't really work as far as I can tell. There's a double standard of sanctions where certain places will get sanctions like Russia and Iran, but Israel and the UAE will not get sanctions. Because it's not really about people's lives, it's about the geopolitical interests of America. And so yes, from a geopolitical interest perspective, the sanctions make sense. If you want to kneecap an enemy's industries and economy and stuff, it does do that. It creates some kind of deterrent and pressure. But some places have been under sanctions for years. And you know who's being suffered? You know who's suffering the most? The people. I understand some people will say, oh, well, you want them to remove sanctions on these countries, on Iran, while it's actively killing people. I'm sorry to say, but yes. Because the sanctions are also killing people. The people on the top are not feeling the squeeze. It's the people on the bottom of the society that are dealing with the pressure of the sanctions most. I would say to go out and protest about it, but I honestly don't think protest is going to work. I don't think protest is very effective when it comes to foreign policy. So I don't really have much of a solution beyond getting more serious about organizing around your actual economic power, because that is a language that they actually understand. I'll also say, and this might be a bit spicy, the sanctions focused narrative also is flawed, it's limited, and it strips away the agency of the people being targeted by the sanctions. So yes, you should oppose the sanctions, but I don't think you should be trying to talk over people who are expressing issues within their country beyond sanctions. I don't think you should be speaking over people to boil down the internal conflicts and issues of countries antagonistic to the US to just sanctions. I think you can oppose sanctions without erasing all of the dynamic and diverse perspectives coming from those countries down to this simple binary of pro-government and anti-government, leftist government supporter versus rightist imperialism supporter in the case of Venezuela, and pro-Palestine theocracy supporter versus pro-Israel monarchist supporter in the case of Iran. There's a lot more to the story. Please stop forcing these simplified narratives, these simplified answers. I know it's difficult in this information landscape to know the full story, but while being open to learning more and intellectually flexible, have some values and principles to guide you, so you're not just going with the wind. I hope I've made myself understood. I expect people to disregard what I'm saying. I expect some people just run with their own interpretation of what I've said. You should ignore those types of actors, as I try to do, because arguing with them on the internet is not going to change anything. And there's very little that I can do from where I am besides hoping for the best, maintaining critical solidarity, and focusing on my immediate circumstances to create some actual change. I'm not in America. I think those in America have a lot more power than they've exercised thus far. But maybe that will change. Remains to be seen. And I hope I can encourage that process. The only way we're going to be free is when we stand together, locally and internationally, against this entire system. Because it's the entire system that's the enemy. And it's not going to be some kind of step-by-step, stage-by-stage liberation. There has to be a transnational, international solidarity capable of people rising up in one place, people rising up in another place, working together, exchanging resources, exchanging support to amplify their power, rather than trying to cut up the movement and draw lines and say that you have to silence your criticism or betray the oppressed because of this 4D geopolitical chess. And in case you couldn't tell, my voice is like completely shot at this point, so we're gonna leave it at that. Lord Father, okay, that's all I have for today. All power to all the people. Peace.